After a tough loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning, Dan Bilesma said the team just ran out of jam or juice and jam. So, what has the team done since to get it back? Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what do you say, Seattle hockey fans? Happy Monday, and welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team every single day. My name is Erica L. Ayala, your host of Locked On Kraken, also your host of the Women's Hockey Report on the Locked On NHL channel. I'll tell you a little bit more about that later in the show. Want to let you know today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Remember, download the Game Time app, use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and get $20 off your first purchase. We're going to talk, of course, about the Seattle Kraken on this podcast. We know that it was a tough road for the Kraken in their last game. Played the Tampa Bay Lightning and fell to the Lightning 5-1. If we look at Allison Lukan's post-game analysis, not a quality start in goaltending for Seattle. Do have a quality start on the side of Tampa Bay. It was an interesting conversation that Dan Bilesma had with media, not just post-game, but specifically at practice. The team had Sunday off, but they did practice today, Monday. And talking about goaltending, I'm going to get into that a little bit more a little later on the show. But, this wasn't a solid game. And Vince Dunn did not mince words, just felt that the team, again, ran out of juice, ran out of jam. That was kind of the conversation that Dan Bilesma had, or the language that he and Brandon Montour used, actually, jam. Juice, jam, I call it moxie, whatever. They didn't have it. You look at 5-on-5 offense, 44% of that was coming from, or the puck in the offensive zone, 44% for the Lightning, 35% for the Seattle Kraken. If you look at power play attempts, the one goal that the Seattle Kraken did get came off of a power play, so we like that. Shots on goal on the power play, 4. Shot quality, 0.3 for the Seattle Kraken, as compared to 7 shot attempts in 3 chances for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They also got a power play goal in this game. 5 quality shots, or 5 shots on goal, and 1.0 quality shot quality as measured by expected goals. Goaltending, 26 of 30 pushed aside by Grubauer, 21 of 22 obviously pushed aside on the Lightning side. And, again, you don't want the Seattle Kraken losing, especially, and I think Vince Dunn was alluding to this, you don't want the team falling back to bad habits. And this was maybe a little bit of a combination of just finding, like, you lose the juice, the battery is depleted, and you've got to reset, retool, all of those things, recharge. And maybe it was a little bit of that. But again, this team has had issues with consistency. So I'm with Vince Dunn. Concerned, sure. I'm not going to get hysterical about the loss, but concerned for sure. Dan Bilesma got into goaltending a little bit the other day, and I think it's worth playing just a little bit of a snippet of what he was talking about in that respect, because, the Seattle Kraken said that we would get a more equitable split in net. That has not happened. And Bilesma really broke down a little bit of what the idea and the mindset was, particularly about giving Joy Decord the lion's share, if you will, of starts. And as you will hear Dan Bilesma say, as we've talked, and as we talk about what seems like every season, some of these are just freak accidents and injuries coming from Philip Grubauer, where the quote-unquote secondary goaltender is given opportunity, and then they make good on that opportunity to the point where, you give them the benefit of the doubt over Philip Grubauer. But Anyway, I want to hear you, or I want to play for you what Dan Bylsma said so you can hear for yourself. And I do think from what we're hearing from Bylsma that we are going to get closer to that equitable split.
I think probably the last 5 games it's been our best goaltending, from each goalie. Jersey game for Groube was really solid. We talk about, unfortunately, that when a few bounces off us get behind them, but I thought that was a real solid game for him. Joey's game against the against the Panthers was outstanding. Groube draws in last game, and while I thought his game in New Jersey was really good, that was probably his best outing last game. So where we thought we were at the beginning of the year with 2 good goaltenders, each one of them go on any given night and give us a chance to win is happening now for us. And when you play the amount of games we've played in the last 12 games, it's great to be able to have both guys go on any given night and give you a chance. And so, you look at the schedule, it's Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and the next week is 3 and 4 going into the break. So we'll see them both. Yeah, I think really just putting the injury, the accident, just aside. I think early on in the season, they both were playing, numbers wise, pretty similar, and Joey got more of the net, or got the net really when Groube got the injury and was out for about a week, and Joey played 4 in a row and did really well with that as well. So I think he's settled in from the injury and gotten a few more games under his belt now to say now it's a consistency in his game.
Yeah, so again, expecting that we will see both netminders. Of course, the game against Ottawa is tomorrow, Tuesday. And then after Ottawa, you've got on the road Chicago and Vegas. And so interesting. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Chicago, Vegas, and then Colorado before this short little break for the December Christian holidays. Before we then get into the new year where the Seattle Kraken will actually start 2025 at home. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get closer there. But, I think I mentioned this, but I know that a healthy Grubauer and a confident Grubauer is important for this Kraken team. We don't make it to the second round. We don't make it to game 7 in the second round of the playoffs a season ago, or 2 seasons ago, technically, without Philip Grubauer. And I love that Joey Daccord is getting these significant minutes in the NHL. And, speaking of juice, we need all the juice for goaltending. But when it comes with respect to the rest of the roster, Yanni Gourde was on the ice for practice. Over the weekend, Dan Bylsma expected that Yanni Gourde would be able to make his way back to the lineup. He talked about, whether this is going to be a situation where Yanni goes back with the Matty Beniers line, on Matty's line. I like that. He made compelling arguments as to, why maybe things might switch up, what makes sense also for Yanni's progression coming back. But the reason that the Beniers line has been working, from what we gather from Dan Bylsma, is because of the way they've deployed that line and really looking for significant matchups, which I thought was an interesting comment. So Yanni Gourde, will we see Yanni Gourde? I think it's highly likely we will see Yanni Gourde tomorrow. Who will we see in net? If I were a betting woman, I would maybe say we see Joey Daccord again. But again, we've seen the Seattle Kraken stick with the netminder who was getting the wins. At this rate, you do want Philip Grubauer to have that confidence. I think he does have that confidence. The 5-1 loss, not necessarily completely indicative of Philip Grubauer alone. I think this was just a gassed, tired Kraken team. You don't want it to happen, but it is going to happen. It is inevitable. And this is something where the Seattle Kraken can bounce back. If we take a look at the standings as of right now, when I'm recording before the games tonight on Monday, in the division, the Seattle Kraken are in that sixth spot, 32 points, sitting on 32 points. But we're Vegas at the top of the table, LA, Edmonton, Vancouver, Calgary, and then the Kraken. When we look at the wild card, who we're going up against, you're looking at teams like Colorado, who we're going to play, Vancouver, Calgary, Utah, St. Louis, and then the Kraken. So a lot of work to do still. The Seattle Kraken, I should say, dug a hole at parts in this season. So I'm with Vince. It happens, the score is the score. He said something to that effect. It was a very short clip. Probably I could have put the whole clip in here. And it's still, you would have been like, no way, that's all he said. But I mean, I get where he's coming from. Hey, the score is the score, the game is the game. And now it's the work goes into not making those habits seep into another game. I liked what we heard from Dan Bylsma. They not only focused on shootouts, but there is now an award. There's a trophy for shootouts. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that and talk to Zame a little bit about that. So there is emphasis being put in the right places. And some of that, I think, is because of the transparency and the communication that seems to be going from the coaching staff to the front office, but specifically Ron Francis. So coming up next on Locked On Kraken, John Forslund caught up with general manager Ronnie Francis, as I like to say. And I just want to recap some things that stood out to me from that conversation. We'll get into it on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken, as I mentioned at the top of the show, brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Now, I love the Game Time app. I have it on my phone. I use it when I'm traveling. And Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better. And of course, it's a perfect gift. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for live events easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I've told you I use Game Time when I go to Mariners M's games. I particularly like the view from your seat feature because I do have a particular place that I like to sit at when I'm going to baseball games. I like being on third base side regardless of the stadium. And so I'm able to do that on the Game Time app. I also like the all-in pricing. You can toggle that feature, which shows you the total upfront cost with no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the National Football League all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. So visit FanDuel.com. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the National Football League, and of course, us right here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. And of course, also want to make sure you're listening to some of our other shows, including, of course, the Locked On NHL's new Saturday programming, which is the Women's Hockey Report. On Saturday, we discussed Rachel Donner and I, that is, we discussed, is Sarah Fillier the Caitlin Clark of women's hockey, but more specifically, the PWHL? We'll give you the comparisons, the comps, and things that are not exactly the same, and why one player actually has more of an advantage than the other when it comes to stats, and why one player has an advantage over the other when it comes to market. Two different things. Very important conversation. And of course, we'll get you up to date with everything that happened last week in the PWHL. And we've got some time for Friday's show because there's a little bit of a break in the PWHL action. We talk about all that. Check out Locked On NHL and the Women's Hockey Report. Okay. On today's episode, though, we got a lot. We got a lot to talk about, including Ronnie Francis sat down with John Forslund. Now, there is a video available. I'm going to be looking at the transcript, but this is from the front office, Ron Francis. At the midpoint, as the midpoint of the season nears, Kraken general manager Ron Francis sat down with broadcaster John Forslund to discuss what he's seeing in his team and the performances of players in the NHL, AHL, and potentially World Juniors. We'll talk a little bit more about World Juniors at the end of the show. The gentlemen do start off, of course, by talking about David Bonderman, and Ron Francis talks about what he knew about Bonderman prior to getting involved with the Seattle Kraken and his personal observations. If you missed that episode, I think it was the Wednesday episode, we did go over David Bonderman, his legacy. We had Zame weigh in as someone who is in the Pacific Northwest. So, this went up, or the interview, was conducted on December 13th on Friday. So it will not cover the Tampa game. We kind of did that in the first segment. But, they talk, of course, about the reset, talking about the reset with Shane Wright in particular. And, I like what the conversation was regarding the reset. We talked about it a lot on the podcast. This is not necessarily a punishment or a wake-up call, especially for a player like Shane Wright. And that's exactly what we heard from Ron Francis. That being said, there are some things that the coaching staff has talked about with Ron Francis and his front office team, and he mentions heading to Carolina. And he says, the beauty of playing in the West is you get a lot of time on an airplane, so you get a lot of time to talk. Dan spent a lot of time talking with his coaches on the flight ahead of the game against the Carolina Hurricanes. We talked a little bit at the end, and I said, let's get to the hotel, check in, and let's sit and just have a beer and talk about things. And in that conversation, Ron Francis said that, I thought we got a little bit sloppy in those games leading up to Thanksgiving and that road trip. So again, not wanting to fall into the habits. Vince Dunn addressed that. I talked about that in the first segment. Says, so Dan and his staff had a meeting before practice the following day. They went back over systems stuff. They said the dialogue was really good with the players and understanding what we needed to do and how we needed to play. And we made some roster adjustments. Maybe that opened up some eyes. So whether we're talking resets, whether we're talking tinkering certain lines, of course, Shane Wright was back in the lineup here. He talks, of course, about the reset and how that looked a little different for Shane Wright. And that's another thing that I really liked. So I had talked about this on an episode before. Who was Shane Wright sitting with? What conversations was he having while he was on these resets or these healthy scratches? And so this is the rationale behind that. If you look at the options you have, if you send him down to the minors, that probably doesn't help because it affects his confidence, Ronnie Francis said. So we talked about doing a reset. We pulled him out and we had him watch 3 games. In the first period of the first game, he sat between myself and head of player development, Jeff Tambolini, in the press box and watched. Jeff has worked with these guys as they come up through the system and player development. So Jeff was working with him on a shift-to-shift basis now, and then I would throw in my 2 cents. And at the end of the period, he thanked us for the opportunity. And I just made mention to him, hey, let's not make this a common thing. Let's go out there and do things and do the things you can do, and you'll have success. Then he talks about putting him in the game against Anaheim. I think it was Zane, in a conversation with Zane, where he mentioned he has had success against Anaheim before. It's a younger roster that did go into some of the decision making when it came to putting him back into the lineup. And then we also hear Ron Francis say he's really starting to build some nice chemistry with Oliver Bjorkstrand and Ellie Tolvanen, and he's playing really well. So the reset, it has worked. Having said this, Ronnie says he's still 20 years old and doesn't turn 21 until next month. So we have to handle him the right way. And I think you do that with all your players. You try and look at the big picture and do what's best for them. Maybe sometimes they don't see that in the moment, but to Shane's credit, he's been very understanding and very positive throughout the whole process over the past few years. And I think it's starting to pay dividends now. And that last piece is just because I didn't read the full quote, started a little bit in the middle, but he talked about all of the eyes on Shane and how there were all these expectations coming in. And he also alludes and mentions to Shane had a great training camp, a really solid preseason, and then it just, we lost focus just a little bit. So that's why he talks a little bit about being positive throughout the entire process, because it has been a process for Shane, but he's taking it in stride. He's taking it as a professional, whether it's going back down to juniors, being up with the NHL and being a healthy scratch, really not seeing the ice, or having 3 games where he's asked to sit and, go over things. There's a line in a movie that I love in basketball. It's when I don't yell that you should be nervous. They're not yelling, they're having a conversation. But when someone is willing to have a conversation with you about something that maybe isn't going well, and I'm saying this for myself as well, because I don't always take this advice, but you have to remember, you might not like it. And again, that's been alluded to in what Ron was saying with John Forslund. You might not like it. You might not be able to receive it in good faith in the moment, but hopefully, because of the work that has been done in an organization like the Seattle Kraken, once you settle down, you take your feelings out of it, you connect with your goals that you have, you can see that what's happening is in good faith. And of course, that is assuming that it truly is in good faith. In this situation, I have no reason to believe that it's not in good faith. I'm just saying, generally speaking, sometimes you can get instruction and it's not in good faith. Have you been there? Raise your hand. Some of you have. Maybe I'm going through that right now, and that's why I feel a little convicted. I don't know. Anyway, this is a show about the Seattle Kraken, so we'll focus more on them. And then the conversation goes on to talk about accountability. And they talk about the free agents of Montour and Stevenson. And then they talk about the pipeline, especially in the the AHL, but also how the Seattle Kraken have a significant amount of prospects or AHL talent that is expected to suit up at World Juniors. So that overlaps with our next conversation in segment number 3, where we are going to give you the names that we expect to see at Worlds and why it's kind of a big deal that the Seattle Kraken have 7 and a potential 8th player overall that will compete in the tournament coming up in just a handful of days. We'll talk about that as we close out today's Monday episode of Locked On Kraken. Today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by a newer sponsor welcoming Rocket Money. Now, Rocket Money is actually something that I use because I am a freelancer, I have a business, and I have a few other side jobs. And so sometimes being able to categorize my spending, yes, I have different bank accounts, but maybe you don't have your card, or, you need to switch money from one account to the other. Rocket Money helps me sort those and categorize those things. What is a business expense? What is a personal expense? Is there something that's recurring that comes out of one of my accounts every month that I can just make sure that as I'm getting ready for taxes that I have that listed? Rocket Money helps me do all of that because Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel unwanted subscriptions. Now, I've never had to do that, but it does monitor your spending and help lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Those are all things that are huge. If you want to save time, and we know that saving time is a way to save money, then Rocket Money can help you do that. It brings everything together in one place. And again, that's why I use it, whether it's subscriptions, spending habits, even goals you want to hit in the year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/locked-on today. That's rocketmoney.com/locked-on. rocketmoney.com/locked-on. And thanks as always for making Locked On Kraken a part of your daily destination. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken, also host of a new women's hockey report, which is every Saturday morning on the Locked On NHL channel. We talked about Sarah Fillier. We talked about international breaks at the very beginning of a new PWHL season, and if that's necessarily a good thing. But we do know that international breaks are a part of, or international tournaments are a part of pro hockey, even on the men's side. And we have a pretty significant international tournament coming up. And of course, that's the World Junior Championships, will be held in Ottawa, Canada, 9 days away from that tournament. You've got Czechia, Switzerland, Finland, Canada, Slovakia, Germany, the United States, and Canada all competing in that tournament. And we are expecting that we will have 7, maybe even 8 prospects from the Kraken as a part of that tournament. And here's who we know. So I'm sure you can imagine Berkeley Catton is going to be there. Caden Price, Carson Reinkampf. We also are expecting, or we know that we will see Edward Shala. We have Team Finland winger Julius Mientinen, Kim Saarinen, who will suit up for Team Finland. Sweden, Zeb Forsfall. Record number of Kraken prospects at World Juniors. The premier under 20 hockey tournament that's happening later this month. Games will start on December 26th, and the tournament will conclude on January 5th. And so, playing in World Juniors is huge. Jordan Eberle is kind of always going to go, and his goal in World Juniors is one of the most memorable ever. But this is what Tambellini, who we mentioned earlier, he had that sit down alongside Ron Francis with Shane Wright. If you're in this tournament, there's a very high likelihood that you're going to play in the National Hockey League, or at least be given a really good opportunity. Tambellini said. So to have 7 and maybe 8 players in this tournament, it just shows we've identified some very good players, and we're going to have a lot of swings at these guys playing in the league, hopefully for a long time. Now, this is a conversation that I want us to hold on to. We haven't talked a lot about the Firebirds. There's just been a lot of conversation that we've needed to have about the Seattle Kraken. But I don't want the Firebirds to get lost in the sauce. The Kansas City Mavericks will be coming back to Tulsa soon, so I'll probably have something for you from Tad O'Had soon. But the fact that we have potentially 8 players playing at World Juniors, a very high, very esteemed stage, a really good primer for those eventually making the leap to the NHL. I think that also tells us a little bit, or at least could tell us a little bit about the timeline. I know I've been very bullish and very impatient about the Seattle Kraken timeline. This is what gives me a little bit of hope. And I think at least some of the hesitation and the reticence to make super big splashes or in season trades, because we've seen goaltenders get traded, we've seen captains get traded already in the NHL. I do think that there is value in keeping the pipeline solid. We have seen teams, I think Vegas is a team probably that you can look at that perhaps they could have gotten to where they wanted to sooner had they thought about the pipeline a little bit differently. But it's a balancing act because as we stand, Vegas has a Stanley Cup. They also are in first place in the division and are squarely in playoff position right now, where we have a solid pipeline, but we haven't realized a lot of that potential. So, what is the balancing act between keeping veterans at the NHL level and bringing in some of these young guys? And that's where perhaps the vision becomes why you extend or why you sign Chandler Stevenson for 7 years, why you sign Brandon Montour for 7 years. And that's because they want those guys to be in place. But of course, that begs the question, who won't be in place? Who won't be a part of that long-term vision? And it's not something that we can answer right now, but that is another way of looking at it. I still think more needs to be done in the here and now because, getting young prospects into something that's kind of half baked doesn't help make the NHL team a better team. And Zame is not the only one. Zame is not the only one who has said that there's pressure to win and to win as soon as possible because everyone in sports really thinks that it's not a matter of if, but when Seattle MNBA returns. Are they going to be the Supersonics? Hey, let me know in the comments. I know how I feel about the Metropolitans. If the New York Metropolitans left Queens for anywhere out of New York State, I don't know that I want them called the Metropolitans. Or let's put it this way, the Montreal Expos became the Nationals, right? If a team comes back to Montreal, do they have to be called the Expos or do they need a new name? I have very strong opinions on this, but I don't know how Seattle feels. Do you want the Supersonics back? Is that the team name that you want? Or is it more important to get a team in Seattle and they can be called whatever you want them to be called? Let me know in the comments if you have strong feelings about that. And I can't wait to hear what Zame has to say about that. But this is our show. Game day tomorrow. So we will have some updates, roster updates if we have them by the time we record. Might have to do a little bonus refresher for you later in the day. But the Seattle Kraken taking on Ottawa. They didn't have the juice against Tampa, but did they refill the cup enough to get back into the win column? Well, I guess we'll have to find out. We'll watch tomorrow's game. Until then, be kind to yourself. Be kind to others. Hold fast, stay true, and let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.